Okay, by definition, fanzines are non-professional publications produced by fans of a particular cultural phenomenon, such as literary or a musical genre, for the pleasure of others who share their interest. They were initially sold for little or no money, though the commissioning of artwork for them, as well as advanced printing technology and increasing print runs, have pushed costs up to about $20 or more each. Possibly much more if they're out-of-print collector's items. Readers themselves often contribute to fanzines by submitting their own articles, book reviews, letters of comment, and fan fiction. Though the term fanzine only dates from 1940, when it was popularized within science fiction and comic book fandom, the first fanzines actually date back to at least the 19th century, when, as a uniquely American development, literary groups formed amateur press associations, or APAs, in order to publish collections of fiction, poetry, and commentary. These publications were produced first on small tabletop printing presses, often by students. As printing technology progressed, so did the technology of fanzines. Early ones were hand or typewritten and duplicated by primitive reproduction techniques like carbons or hectography, which limited the size of the print runs. The use of mimeograph machines and later photocopiers enabled greater print runs and the addition of illustrations and color. These days, thanks to the advent of desktop publishing and self-publishing, there's often little difference between the appearance of a fanzine and a professional magazine. And today we're seeing the proliferation of e-zines, which exist only on the internet. Now, few writers have had as many fanzines, chapbooks, and other ephemera dedicated to them as has Robert E. Howard, and it can be both exciting and daunting to try to collect them all. Many of these date from the so-called Howard boom of the 1970s, but the earliest were from the 1930s, when Howard was still alive. Howard produced his own fanzine called the Golden Caliph in 1922 or 1923, as well as 3 issues of one entitled The Right Hook in 1925. Howard collaborated with his friend Tevis Clyde Smith in Smith's own zine, the All Around magazine, in 1923. And Howard participated in an amateur poetry journal called The Junto that ran from 1928 to 1930. One of the earliest fantasy-related fanzines was the Fantasy Fan, founded by a 19-year-old correspondent of Howard's named Charles Hornig. Its March issue contained Howard's first appearance in a widely distributed fanzine with a story called Gods of the North. This was just a retitling of the story, The Frost Giant's Daughter, that the pulp magazine Weird Tales had rejected. And so Howard recycled it by retitling it and changing the hero's name from Conan to Amra. Then Howard published another rejected tale, The Garden of Fear, 4 months later in the second issue of Marvel Tales. In 1935, Howard contributed a story to the zine Fantasy Magazine as part of a round-robin novelette called The Challenge from Beyond. In 1936, Howard published his pseudo-historical essay, The Hyborian Age, in 3 installments in 3 issues of The Fantagraph, of which this is one. I have 2, and if it weren't for a certain Frenchman, I would have 3. They were collected in a zine by the Laney publishers that is now perhaps the most sought after of Howard's zines. Now, has anyone here ever seen the Laney edition of the Hyborian Age?
Photocopy of it.
You have a photocopy. Does anyone, you've seen one? Do you own it?
I think I saw it at the El Spray Camp papers down at HRC.
But no one actually has one.
What the?
The Laney edition, yeah, of the Hyborian Age.
Is that,
Yeah, that was the first time they put them all together.
do
and-
you have one?
No.
I have one.
I was going to offer,
Oh,
I was going to ask how many pounds of flesh someone might want for,
I've got a photocopy of Glenn's.
so of course Glenn would have one, yes. Oh, well, Fanciful Tales in 1936 published Howard's poem, the Solomon Kane's Homecoming, and it also contains a brief statement about Howard's death. 1956 saw the birth of what would become the most important of the amateur press journals on sword and sorcery, namely AMRA. Of course, I forgot to bring a copy, so you can imagine I'm holding it here. Its second volume, edited and published by George Skithers, is it pronounced? Sithers, okay. Ran for 71 issues for almost 24 years and contained many contributions by noted authors such as Fritz Leiber, Elsbreg de Camp, Hal Anderson, and Lynn Carter. Like the best fanzines, it became more professional looking as it went along and then ended up winning 2 Hugo Awards. He's holding a copy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a copy.
The most prestigious of the fanzines of the 60s and 70s was the Howard Collector, edited and published by Glenn Lord. Running 18 issues, it published fiction, poetry, and letters by Howard, most never seen before, along with reviews and essays by others. Lord was able to do this by dint of his obsessive collecting of Howardiana and his activity in the role of literary agent for the Howard heirs. His articles and books on Howard and his frequent help to others publishing their own articles were quite simply the greatest single contribution to Howard's literary reputation and scholarship, leading directly to the Howard publishing boom of the 1970s. Besides the books and chapbooks being published then, this boom saw the founding in 1972 of the Robert E. Howard United Press Association, or REHUPA, by Tim Marion. Like other amateur press associations, its bi-monthly mailing consisted of bound fanzines contributed by all the members and shared only among them. REHUPA is noteworthy, and not only for publishing 229 mailings to date over 39 years, but also for evolving from zines of mere fanish effusions to often first-rate productions of criticism and research by people who are now among the most eminent Howard scholars and critics, many of whom are here today. In 1974, George Hamilton started publishing Cross Plains, a fanzine edited by Wayne Warfield. It continued the Howard Collector's practice of printing unpublished or obscure Howard stories or poems, most supplied by Glenn Lord, and this became a tradition for the fanzines of the time. Cross Plains ran 7 issues over 2 years. The same year, Jonathan Bacon began publishing Fantasy Crossroads, which was not as focused on Howard, but it contained a good bit of Howard material. It lasted 15 years until 1978. 15 issues, did I say, until 1978. The mid-70s saw the appearance of REH Lone Star Fictionaire, professional-looking magazine that showed what you could do when you had real money. It was published by Arnie Fenner and edited by Brian Roark, they did 4 issues that featured contributions by the likes of Carl Edward Wagner and interviews of Glenn Lord, DeCamp, Roy Thomas, and others, and the first serious condemnation of pastiches and posthumous collaborations using Howard's work, most being done by DeCamp and Carter. Okay. Now, the opposition to pastishing among Howard purists gradually built up a demand for pure, accurate Howard texts that was finally met by the Wandering Star and Del Rey books of the past 12 years. Also about this time was the debut of the long-running zines, The Howard Review and REH Gun Raconteur, produced by my colleagues here, who I assume will describe them, either now or at the banquet tonight. By now, all these zines were featuring art by Krenkel and Fabian and many other professionals. Interference in the publishing market by pastishers and the distraction of the poorly adapted Conan movies led to a dry spell among both Howard books and fanzines in the 1980s, though Mark Saraceni did put out 3 issues of the zine Cromlech. Do I have that? Nice. Anyway, 1990 saw the debut of The Dark Man, a zine founded by Rusty Burke, which over the past 20 years has evolved into a scholarly journal, even if most of the contributors are not academically affiliated. It was later edited by Frank Kaufman and is now edited by Mark Hall, a Rehoopensall. Frustration with the Dark Man's slow publication pace and its somewhat dry academic bent led Rehoopin and Dark Man board member Leo Grin to go off on his own and pursue his own vision of a Howard zine that would be both scholarly and exciting. And so the Cimmerian was born in 2004. It ran 35 issues over 5 years, publishing many highly regarded research and lit crit articles, and featuring a vibrant letter column and an associated set of its own annual literary awards, as well as a prestigious blog that ran until last year. Now, zines often end as a result of financial difficulties, but can end just as often due to the burnout of their editors. Whether this was the case with the Cimmerian or whether it was due to conflicts between Grin and other fans is debatable, but it's clear, I think, that the very overreactions that had a hand in the Cimmerian's demise are to be expected when you're dealing with fans obsessed enough to put out their own magazine. For without that focus and commitment, you wouldn't get such publications in the first place. Now, what leads a person to put out his own zine? Well, the fanzinists speak of their desire to fill a need, contribute to a cause, and commune with other fans. Whatever their motive, I'm sure making money isn't one of them, since that's rather difficult to do. A notable long-term trend of Howard zines is the significant improvement in the level of their scholarship and criticism, driven by the achievements of Rehoopins and others, and playing an important role in this second Howard boom that we're experiencing now. Scholarly papers on Howard are being presented at pop culture conventions, and I think this assault on the gates of academia is both laudable and necessary if we're to win Howard his due measure of respect. Certainly, I think we have more to work with in terms of genius and versatility with Howard compared with, say, Lovecraft or Burroughs. And we have more accomplished champions of Howard active now than do other such authors. Finally, how some fanzines manage to hang in there for years and years is something I can't give you any insight into, but hopefully my colleagues here can, since they've been doing it longer than anybody.